The prison at Pitesti and re-education. Among the many prisons of communist Romania, Pitesti is a particular one. It became famous for the horrible atrocities that happened there as a result of the implementation of that satanic experiment known as re-education. Valeriu did not undergo re-education. He was transferred to Bucharest, then to Târgu Ocna, before the experiment at Pitesti began to be applied on a large scale. Re-education was also attempted at Târgu Ocna, but it was thwarted by circumstances in which an important role was played by the attitude of the prisoners, as influenced by Gafencu. Let us now examine what constituted this experiment of re-education, the most loathsome of all methods used in communist prisons to destroy a man. In the first part of the year 1948, following an order from Bucharest, the prisoners were grouped according to their age at the time of arrest. All university students were sent to Pitesti. In the first phase, the prisoners, most of them legionnaires, lived under a rather lax regime. In a short time, however, things changed, and what can be identified as a program of extermination was initiated. The guards became very strict, doling out harsh punishments to the prisoners for perceived offenses. The quality of food deteriorated, and they were given just enough food to keep them alive. Beatings, cold, and hunger lowered their physical and moral resistance. All of these measures represented only the preparatory phase, so that when re-education was later unleashed, exhausted prisoners would be that much easier to subdue. A group of prisoners was brought to Pitesti from Suceava, led by Gheorghe Calciu-Dumitreasa. Calciu was to become famous for crimes and torture committed at Pitesti and later at Gheorghe. Gheorghe Calciu-Dumitreasa and other Suceava prisoners had joined the communists while in prison, and they were chosen by the prison administration as the tool by which re-education would be implemented. It must be stated from the beginning that re-education was conceptualized at a high level by leadership in the Ministry of the Interior, Calciu and his group essentially being the instruments. When the experiment was called off, they were executed by the very communist government they had served, while those who were truly guilty, those in the shadows, went unpunished. Initially, the Suceava prisoners were scattered throughout the cells, mixed in with the others. They succeeded in gaining the others' trust with their well-meaning attitude. After some time, at the beginning of December 1949, the Suceava prisoners, together with the other prisoners who were purposefully selected, were brought back together to inhabit the same cell. One day, Calciu and his group announced to the others that they had changed their ideas, that they had given up legionnarism and had been re-educated, adopting communist ideology. When they recommended to the others that they do the same, there was objection and laughter. Calciu and his followers attacked. Armed with broomsticks and wooden clubs hidden ahead of time under mattresses, they began beating the others. Soon thereafter, the prison leadership, director, officers, guards, joined Calciu, severely beating the ones who would not renounce legionnarism. This moment marked the beginning of the re-education program, which meant continuous beatings and torture. The prisoners, closely supervised by Calciu's group, were subjected to a regime of constant terror without the possibility of escaping or committing suicide. The torture was well planned. It stopped only when the prisoner was about to die. There were various kinds of torture: beatings, hunger, being forced to maintain the same position 17 hours a day, legs extended horizontally, hands on knees, chest at 90 degrees. And at the slightest wavering, the supervisor would respond with a club. The prisoners were forced to drink urine and to eat excrement from buckets that served as toilets in the cells. They were forced to drink highly salted water and then left to dry out from thirst. These were some of the many other tortures devised by the sick minds of the torturers. Those who caved were required to unmask, i.e., to reveal everything they had not confessed at their interrogation, to betray those prisoners who had helped them in prison or those guards who had treated them humanely. Likewise, in order for the destruction to be complete, each one of them was required to profane the memory of whatever had been most important to him in front of everyone in his cell. For example, perhaps someone loved his mother or wife very much. In front of everyone, he was required to denounce them, to make the most obscene and absurd statements about them. Whatever was clean and good in the mind of the one being tortured had to be slandered and dirtied. Theological students and those who were devout, mystical bandits, as they were called, were forced to apostatize, to deny God, to curse everything that had to do with the Christian faith. At Christmas and Pascha, they were forced to sing carols or well-known religious hymns with altered words which profaned Christ and the Virgin Mary. They were forced to participate in blasphemous processions and to celebrate liturgies using human waste from buckets in the prison cells, and were then forced to swallow it as communion. Some of them were baptized in tubs full of excrement. I believe that these things provide sufficient proof of the satanic nature of re-education. After the prisoner unmasked himself, in order to prove that he had been re-educated, he was required to become a torturer himself and to convince others to give up all bourgeois rottenness and to accept communist ideology. Through the use of terror, the prisoners were truly brainwashed. The tortured, no longer able to endure the incessant torment, unable to commit suicide, always closely supervised, finally gave in and were transformed into robots. Their hearts turned to stone and, from being victims, they became executioners. Not even after being re-educated did they escape the terror, for at the slightest sign of solidarity with their victims, they were subjected to torture once again. And thus, living in a constant state of terror, always suspicious of one another, they broke down completely, foregoing the possibility of returning to a normal state. Dumitru Bordeanu, who lived through this experiment, described the experience in his book Martyrsuri din Mlastina Desperare, Confessions from the Mire of Despair. He says that at a particular point, the torturer and the tortured were brought together, a demonic communion was created. For example, if Turcanu asked him what he was thinking, he was unable to lie because Turcanu would have sensed it immediately. From this came the fear of even thinking something which could be considered bad by Turcanu. You could not hide anything if you were questioned, and if you told the truth you were punished. Another satanic aspect of re-education was that everything that the prisoner managed to keep hidden during the interrogation, those things which acted as bulwarks against his internal collapse, began to torment him so much that it was the prisoner who would in the end request to unmask, feeling a sense of relief afterward akin to the relief felt after sacramental confession, even though the things confessed were held against him. A strange process occurred, resulting in mutations to the personality of the one tortured, who came to disavow his former beliefs and to accept whatever Turcanu imposed upon him with the conviction that he was doing good. In the process of brainwashing, his mind was enlightened. He experienced a sense of relief, that he understood everything that he had previously rejected, and he set out, in full confidence, to bring others into the same state of enlightenment. For those of us who have not passed through similar demonic states, these things are incomprehensible. Most of those who tortured others did so under the dominion of terror, without experiencing the mutations I referred to above. The system was planned in such a way that, as a result of the continual torture, very few were able to hold out to the end. In general, most of them compromised, some more, some less, according to the structure and stamina of each. From Pitesti, the system was extended to Gheorghe and the canal, but due to the fact that word leaked out that there were intentional protests, the re-education experiment was stopped. If the secrecy had been maintained, re-education would have been applied to every prison in the country. Considering re-education from a spiritual perspective, both those who directed this experiment from the shadows and those who applied it were nothing but instruments of the devil in the destruction of souls. Father Gheorghe Calciu, who went through Pitesti, said, in order to understand what Pitesti was, we must remain above the facts and get at the roots of this evil, and try to see the internal mechanisms of perversion and its metaphysical dimension. I believe that Pitesti was a diabolical experiment. What occurred there was a struggle between good and evil, in which the executioners and the victims were simply instruments. It was a diabolical experiment that took place in our country more than in any other place in the world. The satanic character of re-education was clearly seen in the words of Turcanu, preserved in the memory of one political prisoner. If Christ would have passed through my hands, he never would have made it to the cross. He never would have resurrected. Christianity, that great lie, would never have existed, and the world would have lived peacefully. I am Turcanu, the first and the last. No one has ever been born who could replace me. No one can lie to me the way that I lie to you fools. I am the true gospel. I am writing it now. I have something to write on, your carcasses. What I write is true. It is not a bedtime story for children. Although the devil may have imagined that he won the battle through terror, he had few decisive victories among those who compromised. After the torture stopped, most of those who had acquiesced gradually returned to God. Considering the subsequent evolution of the re-educated, the devil won a battle at Pitesti, but not the war. According to Father Calciu, most of them returned to Christ more vehemently than before their trial by fire.